Golden State Media Concepts bring you Book Review Podcast, a haven for bookworms of all ages and the widest genres, from mystery to memoirs, romance to comedy, fantasy to sci-fi. If you love to read, this is a podcast for you. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Sarah. Happy New Year. I hope your 2022 is off to a decent start. I mean, I hope it's off to a great, awesome start, but the last couple of years have been a little crazy. So if it's off to a decent start, then that's good. I'm happy for you. Mine is off to an interesting start. I mean, I mentioned a while back that we are moving, and so we're in the process of packing and sorting and selling and donating and storing and doing all of that lovely stuff. And our house just constantly looks like a tornado has blown through it. And I feel like no matter how much stuff has left the house, there's just this never-ending array of more stuff. I don't know where it comes from. I know nature abhors a vacuum, but this is getting ridiculous. And then last week on Friday, we were outside taking the outdoor Christmas lights out, and I had an allergic reaction to something. I don't know what, if something got into my left eye, but the whole left side of my face swelled up. And Benadryl helped, but still 24 hours later, it still was pretty swollen. And then the swelling turned into, I also had a sinus infection. I think I mentioned that at the last episode. So that the swelling affected my sinuses, which then turned into a migraine, which finally went away, but came roaring back on Sunday. I had to go to urgent care and get a shot and some nausea medication because yesterday, we had to go to San Francisco for a meeting, and I knew I could not go in the state that I was in. So yeah, just weird, crazy stuff. And I will laugh because when the doctor at the urgent care came in to see me, I was kind of, I'd actually thrown up. Sorry for the details, but I'd thrown up. My husband had to pull over so that I could fling myself out of the car and throw up. And so I was feeling a little better, but migraines give you sensitivity to light and sound. And so I was sitting in the exam room waiting for the provider to come see me, and I had my head kind of back against the wall. And they didn't turn off the fluorescent lights for me, and it was migraine. So I dug in my purse. I had a sleep mask in there that my aunt had given me over the summer. Don't ask me why I still had it in my purse, but hey, it came in handy. And so the doctor comes in, and I have not only my face mask, but the sleep mask on. And I popped the sleep mask off as soon as she came in, but the look on her face was priceless. So at least I got to have a chuckle about that. It wasn't really chuckling at the time, but afterwards I found it funny. Anyway, feeling much better. Migraine finally went away. So that's kind of my 2022 so far. It's been interesting, to say the least. Let's talk about books. As I mentioned at the end of the last episode, I have a returning guest this episode. This is her third visit to the podcast. She lives in Montana, so I'm already going to think she is awesome. She lives not far from my hometown and actually in the same town where two of my nieces now live. Her name is Debbie Burke, and she writes the Tawny Lindholm series. She has been on, like I said, twice before to talk about the first books in that series. There were 3 at that point, and we are now up to 6, so we're going to talk about the most recent books in the series. So let me give you the description of the 4th book. We'll start there. And this book is called Dead Man's Bluff. If Hurricane Irma doesn't kill Tawny Lindholm, a shady sports dealer will when she becomes the bargaining chip in a high-stakes gamble. The winner lives, the loser dies. So in this one, Tawny leaves Montana. She and Tillman are in Florida, and shenanigans ensue, including a hurricane. And Debbie will tell you more about this book. But I love the sense of humor that Debbie brings to all of her writing. And so let's go ahead now and turn to the interview so Debbie can tell you more about this book, as well as a novella and the 6th book in the series as we talk. Again, the author is Debbie Burke.
Hi, Debbie. Happy New Year and welcome back to the podcast.
Happy New Year to you too, Sarah. It's great to talk with you again.
Thank you. So this is your 3rd time on the podcast. I think you're the 3rd person who has made a third return trip. So you're part of a small group of people.
Well, I'm honored, and I'm surprised you haven't thrown me off the air.
I would never do that.
You're too polite.
Well, I can't imagine what you would do that would make me throw you off. But now I'm waiting with bated breath to see to what extreme you're going to go.
No, I will behave myself.
Okay. So I mentioned this after we actually met for coffee over the summer, but you and I got to meet in person in Montana in, I think, August, was it?
Yeah, and it was so fun to, one of the cool things about today's world is you can connect with people and form a friendship when you've never seen them, and you will never, in some cases you'll never meet them. But when you do get to meet them, it's really a treat because you've already established a relationship with them. And then all of a sudden you meet them face to face. And it's just that's one of the really enjoyable things that I've run into with things like Zoom and email and the internet. There's a lot of technology that I'm not at all crazy about, but that's one of the things, the connection with people in faraway places that I would have never had an opportunity to meet otherwise. And so that was, that's one of the real benefits that I see.
Yeah, I agree. And you never know when you've been talking to somebody. It's easy to talk to people like from behind your keyboard, but then meeting them in public or meeting them in person can be awkward. But I didn't feel awkward or anything. It was awesome.
Not a bit. We already had lots to talk about.
Yes, we did. So thank you again. I really appreciate that you came and met me, and we had coffee. And
well, I appreciate you coming all the way to Montana.
Yeah, so we are going to talk more about your Tawny Lindholm series. And how many books total are there now?
6 books now. One of them is a novella, a little shorty, but the others are full-length, thriller, suspense books, and they are all set in Montana, except for one, which is set in Florida when Tawny goes to Florida on a vacation that turns into, of course, a mysterious case, of missing birth.
We've talked before about how authors are just mean people to their characters, and that was just mean. That was supposed to be a nice vacation, and that was not a vacation.
I tell you, we just beat them up so bad. And after the last book, Flight to Forever, the most recent one, I stuck Tawny out in the Bob Marshall wilderness in a fire lookout with no cell service, no connection with anybody, no roads, no rescue, no nothing, and made her life so miserable. And she actually was asking if she could be retired on a
Oh, but the Bob Marshall is so beautiful.
Yeah, it was that was a fun book to research. I met a Forest Service employee who retired after 30 years, and he had spent many summers up in these fire lookouts that are, these towers that are 50 feet, 60 feet up in the air, watching millions of acres of trees looking for smoke and fire and lightning strikes and so on. And he had some really fascinating stories to tell. And, I'm taking notes frantically as I'm listening to him. And, oh boy, I'm going to have to fit this in. Oh boy, I need to put that detail in. Oh, this is really cool here.
Mhm.
And of course, it's, I recently read from a well-known mystery author whose name I can't think of right now, but she said, we do so much research and we only use about 0.1% in the actual story. But that's one of the fun things about writing, is doing the research, learning about things you have no knowledge of until you start going into it. And it's just been fascinating process for me. I also, in addition to writing fiction, I write nonfiction articles, and I'm on staff for a couple of senior newspapers. And I just got a new gig that I'm excited about. I'm going to be interviewing authors and reviewing books for the International Thriller Writers magazine called The Big Thrill. And so that, you just meet all these really interesting people that have done interesting things. And I would not have the opportunity to do that, in the old world, in the old days of typewriters, and so, before the internet. So that's one of the things it's a real joy for me. And
Mhm.
I'm hopelessly curious, nosy as some people but I'm always, the radar is always out looking for another story idea. I'm a regular blogger on the Kill Zone, which is a crime writing website for readers and writers who like mystery, suspense, thriller genres. And that I have to come up with a new post every 2 weeks. And so I have to always have something in the back of my mind that I'm going to write about that I think people would be interested in learning about. And I just ran across a lady who has a really interesting job. She's one of 6 people in Montana who harvests corneas. And it's
Who harvest corneas? Is that what you said?
Yep.
Okay.
That piece of your eye. And what she winds up doing is, when there's a fatality, either an accident or natural causes or whatever, she will go, she gets called out to that event and harvests the cornea for an eye bank in Seattle. And that eye bank facilitates transplants, corneal transplants.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just one of these weird jobs. You meet somebody and say, oh gee, what do you do for a living? Oh, I harvest corneas. But it opened up this whole different world about organ transplants to me that it was very, very interesting. And I'm writing an article about that. And Organ Donor Month is in April, and so it's going to come out in April, and trying to explain to people and promote the idea of organ donation, because it really saves. It makes a huge difference in somebody's life. I talked to both the family members who lost a loved one and donated an organ, and I've talked to recipients on the other side who then their whole life is changed. They can see again, and it's just a miracle. And so it's interesting to see, one lady I talked to said, one family's worst day becomes another family's best day.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a friend whose brother, it's been almost think it's been 20 years now, but unfortunately he died, but they were able to donate several of his organs, and they're still in touch with those families, which
Yes.
is pretty amazing.
Yeah, and that's what I've run across too, is that the donor families do in some cases make contact with the recipients, and they have this bond, this really amazing bond because of having, you have my son's eyes, or you have my daughter's heart, so it's really a lovely way of connecting in a really meaningful way. So I just never know what I'm going to run across as far as something to write about, but because I just am nosy. I run across all these very interesting people, and so I'm always collecting ideas for future books, future articles, future blog posts for the Kill Zone.
Mm-hmm. Let's go with you're interested. You're interested in people. You're not nosy. You're interested in people's lives.
That's true. That's true. The whole human psychology and the way people react under stressful situations, which of course in the crime genre, under murders and mayhem, people are under great stress, and so it's interesting to me to explore that in my books, putting people under an extremely stressful situation and seeing how they react.
Mm-hmm.
Let's take our first break of the podcast. When we come back, more with Debbie, obviously, and I'll also read you the description of the next book in the series, which is actually a novella, and I'll tell you why I am jealous of a fictional character. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
Golden State Media Concepts bring you the Bible Study Podcast. Reflect and journey the Bible as together we study God's Word and be inspired. Bible study made fun and informative for all ages. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Bible Study Podcast.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. I am speaking today with author Debbie Burke about her Tawny Lindholm series. They are thrillers with a heart, as she says. And the next book in the series, it's actually a novella. It's called Crowded Hearts, and the description is as follows. The road to true love for investigator Tawny Lindholm and her boss, attorney Tillman Rosenbaum, has never run smooth. As they prepare to tie the knot, complications throw fresh curves at them. The blending of families, echoes from their past, and an unexpected death. But those problems pale in the face of the lovers' own secret doubts. Will there be a wedding? So this one is a novella, and Debbie talks a little bit about this one and the writing of this. So it was a bit of a departure for her to write more of a romance. But I'll tell you why I am jealous of a fictional character, why I am jealous of Tawny, because at the beginning of this novella, Tillman takes her to a house that he wants to purchase. He wants her to see it because he wants it to be their house. And it's a house in Kalispell, Montana, and I want a house in Kalispell, Montana. I'll take this house. It sounds lovely. I know it's fictional, and I know Tawny's fictional, but come on. I want a house in Kalispell where I can be next to my babies, my nieces. Anyway, let's get back to the interview with Debbie.
Well, let's back up a little bit because we kind of jumped into the middle of things. And so for people who maybe haven't heard the other interviews where you've been on the podcast, can you just give a brief overview of yourself? Just, a brief smidgen of your life.
Okay. Yeah, well, I've always loved to write. I started writing stories probably in the third grade. My grandmother had read to me, as a very young child and taught me how to read before I got to kindergarten. So I was a great, great reader and loved to write and create stories. And then, of course, grew up and life got in the way and, had a career with businesses. And at about a little over 30 years ago, we were able to sell our businesses and move from San Diego to a small town in Montana. And at that point, I finally had the time again to start writing. And I started taking classes at the community college, creative writing classes at the community college. And it was like somebody punched a hole in the dam. And all these stories started pouring out that I had been subconsciously collecting for the last, 30 years, and didn't really realize it. But I guess I was writing books in my head without realizing it, and now I had the opportunity to, to put them on paper. And so I've been writing ever since. I wrote, I think I wrote 10 novels before one of them got published. So I'm a slow learner that way. Didn't have the skills early on, but each novel I learned more, and I was fortunate to have some very kind, gracious mentors who helped me along the way. And so in 2017, my first book in the Tawny Lindholm thriller series was published, called Instrument of the Devil, and it had won a contest and was kind of my breakthrough finally into the published world. And so that after that, I when I wrote that book, I didn't envision it as a series, but because there was a good response to it and to the characters, I continued and wrote a second book and a third book, and now I'm working on number 7 in the series. So.
Mm-hmm. And that is when we met the first time, was the first Tawny Lindholm book when you came on the podcast. So can you give a little bit of an overview of the series as a whole?
Sure. It's Tawny Lindholm is the main character. She is a small town, very naive, sheltered small town woman who is widowed young. And in the first book, she winds up trusting the wrong man who comes in, sweeps her off her feet and romances her, but he unfortunately turns out to be a terrorist who's setting her up as a scapegoat. And so she, spoiler alert, she does survive, and she manages to overcome that problem that she has in the first book. And one of the at the very end of the book, an attorney shows up to help represent her and keep her out of prison. And he is this very brash, aggressive, 6'7" tall guy with a James Earl Jones voice named Tillman Rosenbaum. And he is one of these characters that came out of nowhere. I don't know anybody like him, but he just elbowed his way into the story and he wouldn't leave, and he's been there ever since. So it's now Tawny and Tillman both, are kind of co-main characters in the series.
Mm-hmm. I was actually wondering about Tillman because he is this very larger than life character in more ways than one, but he's also, he has an Ethiopian grandmother. He's Jewish. He is not your typical Montanan. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't people like this in Montana, but when I think Montana, that's not the first image that comes to my head. So I was wondering where he came from.
Well, it was, it was interesting. I have a friend who's a rabbi, and I, was talking to him and learned that there have been Jews in Ethiopia since the time of Solomon. And who knew that there were Black Jews? I didn't, but I have learned some history since then, and it's a fascinating, very different culture and different world. And I think one of the things about Tillman is he's very much, as you say, there aren't too many people like him in Montana. Maybe New York City, you would run across, somebody like him, but he stands out and he enjoys standing out. He likes the limelight. He likes to be the star of the show. Whereas Tawny is shy and retiring, and she's dyslexic and has, a hard time overcoming that, because she always felt like she was dumb because she couldn't read in school, and so she didn't do well in school. And here's this very opposite person who's highly educated, brilliant, bigger than life, noisy, and she's this quiet person that feels inadequate, but yet they wind up playing off of each other, and it's a yin and yang relationship. And she's too naive, he's too cynical, and between the two of them they work together very, very well.
They do definitely complement one another. I'm going to pause here and just say your microphone is picking up lots of background noise, so I'm not sure if you're doing anything or touching anything on your desk.
I was touching some papers and I have put them aside.
Okay. I totally get that. I'm always amazed at how much the microphones can pick up on stuff like this. So let's see. Let me refocus my brain back to the conversation. So when you are, let's talk a little bit more about Tawny. And you've mentioned a lot of her characteristics. What about her specifically do you think will resonate with readers? And then what about her and Tillman as a couple and as main characters do you think will resonate with readers?
Well, I think Tawny is kind of an every woman. She's like your next door neighbor. She doesn't have superpowers. She's not a superhero. She's a regular person. And she struggles with her job, and she struggles with being widowed, and she struggles with finances. And so she's somebody that I think a lot of women can relate to. She's got, a daughter who causes her all kinds of grief. So I think it's because she's very smart. She's very intuitive. She's a really good listener. And she has a lot of human understanding and I guess, for lack of a better term, the emotional intelligence that helps her solve the crime or solve the mystery, whatever. And her understanding of people is her great strength. Where Tillman he's a legal eagle, and he is a legal scholar, and he is very rational, logical, analytical, and if it can't be proved, forget it. And Tawny has, gut feelings and intuitions that, of course, sometimes turn out to be very right and the solution to the problem. And so that the contrast of the two of them, the tug of war between the two very different personality types, yet when they put both their talents together, they accomplish a lot. So it's fun. It's fun because I never know what Tillman's going to do. He just does what he pleases. He doesn't pay any attention to me. I can tell him, don't stop swearing so much. He doesn't pay any attention. He does what he wants. So
well, Tawny frequently tells him that he is an a-hole. So.
Yes.
or he says it himself. She's usually arguing, and he's saying he is.
Yeah. He wears that with as a badge of honor.
Yes. You mentioned earlier talking to the Forest Service ranger about the lookout. Do you tend to kind of start with stuff like that, where you're talking to someone and you think, wow, this sounds great, I should put this in a book? Or do you have an idea for a story and then do research? How does that tend to work for you?
I'm a pantser. Among the writing community, there's kind of two schools of thoughts. You're either a plotter, where you outline your plot ahead of time, or you're a pantser, writing by the seat of your pants. You don't know what's going to happen, and you just wait for the story to unfold. And I'm a pantser, but I will have several different things that tweak my interests that are totally unrelated, yet somehow they kind of come together. For instance, with my first book, Instrument of the Devil, it was based on my personal experiences with my first smartphone, which I could not figure out. And it was making all these strange noises and doing all these strange things that I didn't know what I was doing wrong. And I couldn't just make a phone call with it because it would pop up with all these different screens. And so I took that experience. And at the same time, I had been doing research about the vulnerabilities of the power grid and how easily it could be hacked into and cause massive blackouts. And so I have a terrorist who can use a smartphone to bring down the power grid. And that was actually a thing that could be done a few years ago, where because the security was rather lax at that point. It's now been tightened up. But at one point, somebody with a smartphone could hack into the computers controlling the power grid and could bring it down. So I put these very different ideas together. I put her smartphone as the tool of the terrorist to set her up. So it's, I never know where I'm going to get ideas. The current book I'm working on right now, which is called Until Proven Guilty, I got the idea from a woman in a Zumba class who said that her husband had been contacted by a son that he didn't know he had because of one of these DNA sites, genealogy DNA sites like 23andMe. And so, and of course, this woman was very suspicious of this guy's motives for all of a sudden appearing out of nowhere. And so that I kind of got fascinated with the idea of DNA and family connections and unknown family members. And so that was the germ of the idea for my current book, Until Proven Guilty. And that turned into a whole mare's nest of trying to research DNA, which is a whole lot more complicated than I thought it was going to be. So, but again, I find experts who help me. People are so wonderfully willing to help when you go to them and say, hey, I'm a writer and I'm researching this or that subject. And I'm always feel like, oh, gee, I'm interrupting this really busy person, who has a real life, and I'm just making this stuff up. Why should they talk to me? But people are very, very generous with their knowledge. And so I find researching very rewarding that way, that people are so willing to share their knowledge.
Mhm.
And of course, I buy them lunch to say thank you. Give them a signed copy of the book, so they're horribly underpaid, but but it's worked out really nicely.
Yeah.
Really nicely for me.
Yeah, I had an author on a while back, and actually it's a cozy mystery. It takes place in Florida, but part of it was doing DNA research, and it was way more. Part of the book was the reporter was writing a story about DNA, and there's so many more aspects to it than I had ever realized.
Yeah, it's extremely complicated, and that's one of the things when you're writing about a subject that is extremely complicated. You do not want to turn a fiction book into a textbook, and you can't slow down the story and the pace and the momentum and the suspense by throwing in a bunch of information dumps about what you researched. And so that's always a balancing act, is to know how much to put in and how much to leave out, but yet you want to be accurate with what you do put in. So you have to have the background knowledge to know not to make boner mistakes. So it's a real challenge, but that's why I have beta readers, because they catch me and trip me up when I've done something wrong. And so that's beta readers are wonderful benefits.
Time for the second break of the podcast. When we come back, more again with Debbie, and also the description of her 6th Tawny Lindholm series. This one is called Flight to Forever. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. I am speaking, as you know, with author Debbie Burke about her Tawny Lindholm, Thrillers with a Heart. And the next book that I'll give you the description of is the 6th book in the series. It is called Flight to Forever. This one has a lookout on the front of it. And Debbie and I have had a couple of conversations about lookouts. And I have told her, and I think I've told you, that my grandmother spent a summer working in a lookout in the 40s, and I have a couple of really incredible pictures of her and her aunt, my great aunt Serena, my great aunt Serena, great great aunt Serena, and the really cool pictures. Anyway, Flight to Forever. The description is: what's legal isn't always right. What's illegal isn't always wrong. A Vietnam vet busts his wife out of a memory care lockdown, injuring a cop. They flee to a remote Montana hideout. Tawny Lindholm must find them before the law does, because the vet won't go down without a fight. It just sounds intriguing, right? All kinds of good things that can suck you into that story. But let's go ahead and get back to the interview with Debbie.
Now, this is Until Proven Guilty is your seventh Tawny Lindholm book, but before that, you said you'd written about 10 before you were published. So you've been, you've got a lot of writing experience under your belt, and including the nonfiction. But has your writing process changed throughout the years, or has it stayed pretty consistent?
It's a lot more disciplined and focused now. Having a deadline makes you real disciplined. When I know I have to have a post in by next Tuesday, or an article for one of the newspapers, you don't waste time. You get to it and get it done, and that has been a tremendous benefit because I have to be more organized that way, and it pours over into my fiction as well, because I once it's kind of like once the creative pump starts pumping and the water starts flowing, ideas beget ideas beget ideas, and so I find it's a constantly refreshing process, the creative process, because I'll write a story for the senior newspaper, and then that turns into a book, and so it's just it's a real interesting process. But I'm still a pantser. I always was a pantser. I can't outline in advance, and I don't do that with my nonfiction either. But I know there are certain things I want to accomplish within the article or within the novel. And if I have those major signposts to head for, then I do okay. But it really helps to have a deadline and the discipline that, the somebody's, hitting you with the whip and saying, get back to work.
Maybe it's veering you just a tiny little bit more toward it being a planter.
Right. Yeah.
And then how about Tawny as a character? How has she developed and changed through the writing of the series?
When she started out, again, I didn't plan this as a series, and was kind of surprised when it wound up being a series. But she was a very naive, very trusting, small town. Small town people. We do tend to take people at face value, and until somebody proves themselves otherwise, we figure they're a good guy. And that she has been tempered now with some of the rather nasty characters that she's run across, where she's a little more cautious. She's still the optimist, where Tillman is this the cynist, the pessimist and cynical one. But she's a little more cautious, and she has also realized that she isn't dumb just because she has trouble reading. She's actually very smart, but for a long time she went through life thinking she was just really dumb because of dyslexia. And that is something that I have known a lot of people who were really affected by that in their youth and still struggle with that as adults, that they just can't quite overcome that old stigma of being the dumb kid in class. And she is getting better with that. She realizes, okay, I guess I am capable. I guess I can do things. I can figure things out. I just don't do well spelling, but I can figure things out. So,
well, and she's a slightly older main character. She's in her 50s, which is great. But for her growing up, she would not necessarily have had the same resources that children today have in terms of being dyslexic, even in terms of knowing she was dyslexic growing up.
Right. Yeah. And that is true. It's a different world now, for there's so much more emphasis on special education and special needs that, wasn't around back in her, in her childhood. So it's, that's probably the basic thing, how she's changed. She's still very patient, and she has to be with Tillman.
Yeah. One thing that always makes me smile when I'm reading, because Tillman and Tawny are in their 50s, is they're constantly putting their readers on. So it's just a simple detail, but I'm like, yep, that's just very accurate. And then I have to comment, it's slightly off topic, but you mentioned a couple of times that Tawny is from this very small town in Montana, and she is. And so, from your perspective, moving from San Diego to rural Montana, that is a very small town. Kalispell is a very small town. For me, growing up, my hometown was less than 1,000 people, and so going to Kalispell was an adventure. Like it was a big town to me. I thought it was a city. I didn't realize until later when I branched out of the state that is not a city.
Right. But, well, for a number of years, Montana's hasn't had enough population to have 2 Congress people.
Mm-hmm.
We only had 2 senators, but 1 congressperson, because there's less than 1 million people in the state.
Although we did have 2 when I was growing up, and then that changed, and then now we're back to 2.
Because it dropped, the population dropped, and now it's gone back up enough that we're going to get a second one. But the whole state is still 1 area code, 406.
Yep.
And I kind of shudder for the day when it turns into more than 1 area code.
I know, that's just gonna be weird, because growing up in my hometown, we did not have to dial anything but the last 4 numbers.
Right.
And then when I was, I think 18 or 19, we started having to dial so we had to start dialing a 7-digit number to call, even in the hometown, which was very, very disconcerting.
Right. And I remember in San Diego when it split into about 3 different area codes. It had been, well, I remember before there were area codes too, but when they started splitting areas into area codes, and it would be a long distance call for 3 miles away, because it was a different area code.
Yeah, that's crazy. Tillman obviously was unexpected and kind of shoved his way into the series, as he is wont to do. Any other characters that have surprised you over the series?
His 3 kids, he had 3 teenagers who they hated Dad, and Dad wasn't a very good dad. He's a good lawyer, lousy dad. And Tawny has wound up kind of being the bridge. And those kids started out, I didn't know anything about them until I was writing the 3rd book, Eyes in the Sky. And that's when Tillman takes Tawny to his home in Billings, where his 3 kids are. And they kind of took on their own lives and personalities too, and got very attached to them. I wasn't expecting to write about 3 troubled teenagers, and they just kind of worked their way in, and I'm very attached to them, and they have continued with the rest of the series. Sometimes it's just in a cameo role, a walk on in the later books, but sometimes it's a larger role.
Mm-hmm. That Rosenbaum clan, they're kind of pushy.
They're crazy. Yeah, they are. Yeah, they are. But the middle daughter, I have her being very interested in genealogy and wanting to trace the family history, and so she has gone to Ethiopia and Israel trying to find ancestry and relatives there, and she winds up getting stuck over there because of COVID, and can't fly back to the US. So she's been over there for like 2 years, and she is coming back in the 7th book from her trip. And so again, there's another a thread of DNA, genealogy, family history that runs through that book, and she's part of it.
I was actually thinking about that when you mentioned doing the research for, of DNA, et cetera, because there's just kind of a brief moment in Dead Man's Bluff where they're talking about DNA and Tillman mentions his daughter is interested in it. And I was like, that seems like it could go somewhere. And now it is.
Yep. It's funny how, the subconscious has all these little things that it tucks away, and you're not aware of them at the time when you're writing. But then when you look back and read something that you've written, you say, oh, yeah, I think I will use that. That's a good little jumping off point. And that's something that seems to happen really commonly with writers, that we go back through, we write a story, and then we need something. We need a clue. We need some sort of a twist. And we go back and start at the beginning, and on page 32, there's the little breadcrumb that is the opportunity for the twist that comes on page 215. And so it's kind of cool. I the whole study of the subconscious and how it throws out information that you need, and you don't always know you need it, but it's there. And when you go back, hey, there's that clue. There's that twist that I needed. So 7 books in, and I'm assuming thousands of research hours. How do you keep things straight? So how do you even remember that, oh my gosh, back in book 3 or whatever, I made that comment, and that's going to work perfect. Do you have kind of an overarching encyclopedia of the series, or is it all in your brain? How does that work for you? It's all in my rather forgetful brain. A lot of authors keep what they call a story Bible, and they have everybody's, eye color and nationality and ethnicity and likes and dislikes, and they record all that very meticulously. And I just I think, gee, what did I say about so and so, and in that first book or the second book, and then I have to go back and reread the book. So, and then I find it, but I'm totally disorganized as far as that goes, and it's one of those things that is a real failing. I should be more organized and keep better records. But so far, I don't think I've made any huge gaffes. At least none of my readers have caught me on any huge gaffes where somebody had green eyes in book number 2 and now has blue eyes in book number 6. So.
Time for the third and final break of the podcast. Stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast. Together we dive into the world of sci-fi and science fiction. From episodes of Star Trek, Star Wars, to The Walking Dead, Resident Evil, all the hot new science fiction movies from the backdoors of Marvel or DC. The Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast. You'll never look at science fiction the same way again.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and the conclusion of my interview with author Debbie Burke.
I haven't met your husband, but we've talked about him. He's, from what I gather, nothing like Tillman. But does his character at all, or any parts of his personality, make appearances throughout the book series?
No, I I try to keep personal and professional very separate. The world is getting to be a very difficult place, and I don't like to uh, share a lot of personal information just because there's so many crazy people out there. Uh, um, Speaking of weird topics that I have just run across, are you aware of something called obituary piracy?
Oh, geez, no.
Okay, I just learned about this, and apparently, and it was from a funeral director. Apparently, in the old days, you would write an obituary and it would appear in the local newspaper. And it was kind of the way of telling the community, okay, George has passed on, and here's all his history and his parents' names and where he was born and his children's names and grandchildren's names and where they all live and so on. And that was all just normal information you put out there. Well, nowadays with the internet, it's not just the people in your local community that are reading that obituary. It goes online and it's available to everybody in the entire globe. So 6 billion people theoretically now know that your mother's maiden name was Johnson.
Mm-hmm.
And they are, obituary pirates are plumbing obituaries all over the world is ways to do identity theft and hacking into credit cards, hacking into your accounts, finding your passwords, because things like grandchildren's names, that's what people very often use as passwords to get into their various bank accounts or whatever. And so hackers are doing this, and plumbing obituaries to mine information where they can become identity thieves or many different frauds. And so this whole idea of internet fraud is just getting so prevalent, with all the data breaches. I know we've had at least 4 or 5 medical data breaches, within our particular community, and insurance companies that, medical insurance companies and so on, that where all your personal information has been stolen by somebody who doesn't have your best interests at heart.
Mm-hmm. I want to be shocked, but I just can't be. I mean, once you started describing it, I'm like, yeah, I can surprise nobody thought of it sooner.
I know. And it was one of those things, as soon as the funeral director started describing it, it was like, oh, slap my head, of course. And so it's, the opportunities for crime novels are endless, because the opportunities for crime just keep growing exponentially because of the interconnectedness of the world, and the ability to reach across thousands of miles and steal information that you can use against a person or an organization or a company. Even Amazon's been hacked.
Well, and it's interesting because your first novel was based on your frustration with your cell phone, although thankfully you didn't have the terrorist in your life. But it's, in some ways, being a crime writer for you is great, because you're having to continue to do research and find out what's going on. And some people, once they get to certain ages, they don't want to have to try to learn, because everything is changing so fast. But if you don't learn, then you're so much more vulnerable.
Exactly. And that's a real dichotomy, with today's world, because of I'm a technophobe. I'm a Luddite. If I never saw another cell phone, it would be fine. But you have to live in the world that you're plopped down in. And so it's, it is a real tug of war, but there just endless opportunities for a crime writer. I monitor FBI sites. I have a scam site that I, regular blog that I monitor. A lot of other crime records that I get into. One of the things that I write for the Kill Zone is True Crime Thursday, and so I find a case that is a kind of out of the ordinary and write a column for or post for the Kill Zone about it. And I've run across some very interesting crimes that can be turned into a story. So it's like there's this endless supply of ideas out there that keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. But unfortunately, it's a sad commentary on life, life in the world in the 21st century.
Yeah. So you have plenty of opportunities to write about a lot of different topics with your nonfiction writing, especially. But do you think you will write outside of the Tawny Lindholm series for fiction?
I every book I write, I think that's going to be the last in the series. But then something else, another idea will pop up like that. But I have also been kind of kicking around the idea of going to historical. And I think there seems to be a lot of reader interest in historical fiction now. And I think that may be a reflection on the difficulty of life right now, where everything is so unpredictable and you can't make plans more than 15 minutes in advance because everything changes, and you buy a new cell phone and it's out of date immediately, and you buy a new computer and it's out of date immediately. I think there's a certain comfort level for readers who go back into historic times where we know how World War II ended, so there's no uncertainty back, when you're going back into a historical period. And so that is kind of hanging around in the back of my mind. And it's again one of those things where I'll wait until something sparks my interest, and then I may try another another genre and go into historical. I probably would stay in the crime mystery thriller, just because that's what I like to read, and that's my earliest influence, of course, was Nancy Drew, and so it's that would probably be the genre I would go into, would be historical mysteries.
So what have you been reading when you're not researching or writing?
I don't have time to read.
I know, I'm sure you don't.
I actually do a lot of beta reading, for other authors. So I read a lot of books that are not yet published, but will be coming out soon. And so that's always kind of fun to see what other people are doing. And this new writing gig that I have with the International Thriller Writers Association, I'll be getting books again in advance of or shortly after publication. So I'm looking forward to that, because that will give me an excuse to read. I have to read this book because I have to write a review on it. So I'm looking forward to that, because a lot of the authors in there are people I admire a lot, and like their work. It'll be a while, I think, before I work my way up to Michael Connelly, but I wouldn't mind. Wouldn't mind writing, reviewing his books before they came out. So I'm looking forward to that as a way to give me an excuse to read something that I would love to read, but I wouldn't have time for unless I had to write a review about it. So
I usually save this question for the very last in terms of, is there anything that we haven't covered? But we did talk about one story that you wanted to mention before we started recording. You mentioned that there was a story that you wanted to share. So would you share that experience now?
Yeah, I would love to. Thank you. One of the really huge benefits I've received from working with the Kill Zone is I have met people I would never have met otherwise. And a year or so ago, I was writing about choosing the right word, because as a writer, you want the reader is reading to experience a vicarious emotion, and they don't want to jump out of an airplane. They don't necessarily want to fall off a cliff. They don't want to be involved in a shootout, but they like reading about that and vicariously experiencing the fear or the horror or the joy, all these different emotions. And I ran across an article in Frontiers of Psychology by 3 Japanese researchers who were looking into music and how music can tap into different emotions. And one of the quotes that I ran across was saying, "We consider musically evoked emotion vicarious, as we are not threatened when we experience it in the way that we can be during the course of experiencing emotion in daily life. When we listen to sad music, we experience vicarious sadness." And I thought, gee, that really applies to what writers have to do in choosing the right words, to evoke certain emotions in a reader. And so I reached out to one of the researchers, and she was a PhD candidate at the time. She's now received her doctorate. But I reached out to her, and she's in Japan, and said, "May I quote you, in this post for the Kill Zone?" And she said, "Well, yes, thank you." And I'm so glad, because I was a woman working with 2 men who were very dismissive of her efforts, and she felt very, she had a lot of lost her confidence working on this project. Yet, I guess because I got what she was talking about, it really encouraged her. And so, anyway, I, write the post. I quote her. She writes me back and says, "Thank you very much." And that was, last I heard of it. Well, one of the things she had mentioned was she's a concert pianist, and she had, as a result of working with these 2 men who were very dismissive of her, she had kind of given up being a concert pianist. So anyway, this last week, my very dear friend of more than 30 years died, and I was in the hospital with her at the end, and she passed away just after midnight on New Year's Eve. And I came home, and I was just absolutely numb. And it wasn't unexpected, but it's always unexpected when it happens. And I came home and went to bed, and in the morning I wake up, and I haven't heard from this Japanese PhD for a year. And all of a sudden, there is an email with her sending a video of her playing a Chopin concerto on the piano. And it was like, "Oh, how did you know? This is exactly what I needed at that moment." And, that's just that kind of connection that you make with writing, or, in her case with music, the kind of interpersonal connection that you make with people that is really, I find that very meaningful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, wow, that's amazing timing. And yeah, I know we've talked about your friend before, and my condolences to you and her family. That's so hard, but I'm so glad that you were able to find a little bit of joy amidst that experience.
Yeah, it's just, and this is the kind of thing that's what, as a writer, I'm never going to be rich. I'm never going to be famous. But if I can make these connections with a few people, a few readers out there, that's my reward,
Mm-hmm.
for writing. And that's one of the reasons I really like to talk to book clubs and, talk to writing groups and reading groups and so on. And because they're making that connection with readers. That's just one of my joys.
Have you been doing Zoom book clubs?
Yeah, I actually did several of them. I've talked to people in Florida and Arizona and California, and I'm very willing to do more if book clubs are interested. I love to do them. It's fun to get readers' reactions.
Yeah, speaking of silver linings, I mean, that's one thing that's come out of A, the pandemic, and B, having to learn technology you didn't necessarily want to learn,
Right.
but you're able to
Right.
now do book clubs in places that you may not have ever considered before.
Right.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't buy an airline ticket to fly to Arizona to sell 5 books.
Right. Exactly.
But this way I can connect with readers that way. And that's just really neat. That's really neat.
Yeah. So speaking of the internet and technology, I know you have a website. Where can people find you on the internet?
Okay, well, my website is DebbieBurkeWriter.com. It's DebbieBurkeWriter.com. I'm also at the Kill Zone, and that's killzoneblog.com, KILLZONEBLOG.com. And I'm on Twitter, I have to say sporadically and reluctantly, but it's @BURKE_writer. And I do, have a newsletter, and people can go on my website and sign up for that, and, get various articles that I send out. And if there's going to be a sale, or if there's going to be a new book coming out, I announce that on, through my website, so people can sign up and, hear what's coming, what kind of trouble I'm going to get into next. Yes.
All right, wonderful. Well, Debbie, it has been wonderful to talk to you again. Thank you so much for joining me, especially on this New Year's weekend. I really, really appreciate it.
Well, I really appreciate your kind interest, and it's been fun to connect with you again and catch up. And we're going to do it again face to face in Montana one of these days.
Absolutely.
So thank you once again to Debbie for her 3rd appearance on the podcast, and also for taking the time this summer to talk to me. Actually, it worked out really well. My father, as you know, is having treatments over the summer, and his treatments were in Kalispell. So one day I finally had some time in his schedule to then sneak out during his treatment and meet Debbie for coffee, and we had a really great time. And we had coffee at a place called Liquid Planet, which is a chain in Montana, and they have really cute cups with their cup sleeves are all Montana themed, which I of course love. Anyway, we just had a lovely time, and it was like, how sometimes when you meet someone that you've spoken to in some way, but you've never really met them, and it can be awkward, and it was not. She was just lovely, and I so enjoyed spending that time with her. So you can probably tell that she is just very warm and kind and lovely to be around from her interviews. So thank you to Debbie for joining me. If you are a fan of books set in Montana, most of them, or if you're a fan of strong female characters who are a little bit older than the norm, which is awesome, a female character who has to to pull out her readers in order to get any work done. If you're a fan of thrillers, but maybe thrillers with heart, as these are, then you should definitely check out Debbie's books. And like I said, there's 6 of them, a 7th one coming out, so you have plenty to read. If you're enjoying them, you can just keep reading. I know Debbie will join me again on the podcast, and I am looking forward to that. I hope that you enjoy her as much as I do, and I hope that you will join me for the next episode when I will be speaking with author Nicole Fanning with her series. So far, there are 2 books in the series, Catalyst and I want to say Inferno, but I could be wrong about that because my mind just went blank. But you'll find out more on the next episode when I talk to Nicole. This is very different from what we've been reading. This is one of those mafia romances, and so I'll just leave you with that. Thank you, as always, for joining me. If you have not done so already and you're a fan of the podcast, please do leave a review, starred or written. Either one helps us, really does help, and I appreciate it whenever anybody leaves a review, leaves a comment. Speaking of comments, you can do so on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or TikTok. If you want to know a little bit more about what's going on in the life of the podcast, please do follow on social media. I hope, as I said at the beginning of the episode, that your 2022 is off to a good start, a decent start. Maybe it's a weird start like mine has been, but I hope that it's an okay start. And I will talk to you next time. Whatever you're doing this 2022, I hope it involves plenty of time for getting lost in lots of good books. Thanks.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.